everybody. Welcome back to Goodnight Stories. My name is Lyra, and I will be your guide into whatever book we decide to read tonight. From young readers to young adult novels, my hope is to give you a comfortable space to listen to a story while you work or doze, whatever brings you joy. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of tea if you need. Let's get started. Tonight we jump back into Erin Hunter's Fire and Ice, the second book in the first series of the Warrior Cats. Chapter 4. As they headed out of the camp, the two young warriors nearly crashed into Whitestorm, who was leading Sandpaw and Running Wind into the forest for the dawn patrol. "Sorry," panted Fireheart. He stopped and Greystripe skidded to a halt beside him. Whitestorm dipped his head. "I hear you two are going on a mission," he meowed. "Yes," Fireheart replied. "Then may you have StarClan's protection," meowed Whitestorm gravely. "What for?" Sandpaw sneered. "You off to catch voles?" Running Wind, a lean tabby, turned and whispered something into Sandpaw's ear. Her expression changed, and the contempt in her green eyes switched to guarded curiosity. The patrol stepped aside to let Fireheart and Greystripe pass. The pair raced on and scrambled up the side of the ravine. Fireheart and Greystripe shared few words as they followed the route through the forest to Fourtrees, saving their breath for the long journey ahead. They paused at the top of the steep slope on the far side of the oak-shaded clearing, their sides heaving from the climb. "Is it always windy up here?" grumbled Greystripe, fluffing out his thick fur against the blast of cold air that swept across the uplands. "I suppose there aren't any trees to block it," Fireheart pointed out, screwing up his eyes. This was WindClan's territory. As Fireheart sniffed the air, he detected a scent that all his senses told him should not be here. "Do you smell RiverClan warriors?" he murmured uneasily. Greystripe lifted his nose. "No, do you think there might be some here?" "Maybe. They might want to make the most of WindClan's absence, especially since they know WindClan will be back soon," Fireheart warned. "Well, I can't smell anything now," whispered Greystripe. The two friends padded watchfully along a frozen turf trail sheltered by heather. A fresh scent stopped Fireheart in his tracks. "Can you smell that?" he hissed to Greystripe. "Yes," whispered Greystripe, flattening himself against the ground. "RiverClan." Fireheart dropped into a crouch, keeping his ears below the heather. Beside him, Greystripe lifted his dark gray head to peer over the bushes. "I can see them," he murmured. "They're hunting." Fireheart stretched up cautiously to look. 4 RiverClan warriors were chasing a rabbit through a patch of gorse. Fireheart recognized Blackclaw from the gathering. The smoky black warrior pounced, his claws unsheathed, but sat up again with nothing to show for the chase. The rabbit must have made it to the safety of her warren. Fireheart and Greystripe dropped down again and pressed their bellies against the cold turf. "They're not good rabbit hunters," Greystripe hissed scornfully. "I guess RiverClan is more used to catching fish," Fireheart whispered back. His nose twitched as he smelled the scent of a terrified rabbit coming nearer. With a pang of dread, Fireheart heard the paw steps of the RiverClan warriors fast approaching after it. "They're coming this way. We'll have to hide." "Follow me," whispered Greystripe. "I smell badgers this way." "Badgers?" Fireheart echoed. "Is that safe?" He'd heard the story of how Halftail had lost his tail in a fight with a short-tempered old Brock. Don't worry, the scent is strong but stale, Greystripe reassured him. There must be an old set near here. Fireheart sniffed. His scent glands picked up a strong, almost fox-like scent. Are you sure it's abandoned? We'll know soon enough. Come on, we've got to get out of here, replied Greystripe. He led the way quickly through the low bushes. The rustle of heather told Fireheart the River Clan warriors were closing in. Here, Greystripe shouldered aside a turf of heather to reveal a sandy hollow in the ground. Get inside. The badger's scent will disguise ours. We can wait till they're gone. Fireheart slipped speedily into the dark hole, and Greystripe followed him. The stench of badger was overwhelming. Paw steps thudded on the ground overhead. Both cats held their breath as the steps halted, and one of the River Clan warriors yelled, Badgerset! From the rasping mew, Fireheart knew it was Black Claw. A second voice answered, Is it abandoned? The rabbit may be hiding inside. Fireheart felt Greystripe's fur bristling beside him in the dark. He unsheathed his claws and stared at the entrance to the hole, ready to fight if the warriors came inside. Wait, the scent leads this way, meowed Blackclaw. There was a scrabble of paws overhead as the River Clan warriors charged away. Greystripe slowly let out his breath. Do you think they're gone? Perhaps we should wait a bit longer, make sure none of them stayed behind? Fireheart suggested. No more noises came from outside. Greystripe nudged Fireheart. Come on, he meowed. Fireheart followed Greystripe cautiously out into the daylight. There was no sign of the River Clan patrol. The fresh breeze cleared Fireheart's scent glands of the badger stench. We should look for the Wind Clan camp, he meowed to Greystripe. It'll be the best place to pick up their scent. Okay, answered Greystripe. They moved slowly through the heather, keeping their mouths slightly open to pick up the scent of any more River Clan warriors. They stopped at the foot of a large flat rock that sloped up steeply past the tops of the gorse bushes. I'll climb up and have a look around, offered Greystripe. My pelt will blend better with the stone. Okay, Fireheart agreed, but keep your head down. He watched his friend creep up the rock. Greystripe crouched at the top and gazed around the plateau, then skidded back down to Fireheart. There's a hollow over there, I think, Greystripe puffed, signaling with his tail. I can see a gap in the heather. Let's check it out, meowed Fireheart. It could be the camp. That's what I thought, Greystripe nodded. It's probably the only place up here that's sheltered from the wind. As they neared the hollow, Fireheart raced past Greystripe and gazed over the edge. It looked as if a StarClan warrior had reached down from the sky, scooped a pawful of peat from the plateau, and replaced it with a thick tangle of gorse that grew almost to the level of the ground on either side. Fireheart sniffed. He could smell many scents, all Wind Clan, old and young, male and female, and in the background, the faint odor of fresh kill that had long since become crow food. This had to be the abandoned camp. Fireheart bounded down the slope and plunged into the bushes. The gorse tugged at his fur and scratched his nose, making his eyes water. He could hear Greystripe behind him, cursing as thorns snagged his ears. They pushed through into the sheltered clearing. The sandy ground had been trodden hard by generations of paws. At one end of the clearing stood a rock, worn smooth by many wind-blown moons. This is their camp, all right, Fireheart murmured. I can't believe Broken Star managed to drive Wind Clan out of such a well-protected place, meowed Greystripe, rubbing his sore nose with one paw. It looks like they put up a good fight, Fireheart pointed out, realizing with a jolt how badly ravaged the camp was. Clumps of fur littered the ground, and dried blood stained the sand. Mossy nests had been dragged out of dens and torn apart, and everywhere stale Shadow Clan scents mingled with the smell of terrified Wind Clan cats. Fireheart shuddered. Let's find the scent trail out of here, he meowed. He began to sniff the air carefully and moved forward, following the strongest scent. Greystripe padded after him to a narrow gap in the gorse. WindClan cats must be even smaller than I remember, grumbled Greystripe as he squeezed through after Fireheart. Fireheart glanced at his friend, amused for a moment. The scent trail was quite clear now, definitely WindClan, but mixed and pungent, as if made by many frightened cats. Fireheart looked down. Drops of dried blood dotted the ground. We're headed the right way, he meowed darkly. 2 moons of rain and wind had failed to wash away the signs of suffering. Fireheart could clearly picture the defeated and injured clan fleeing from their home. With a surge of anger, he bounded after his friend. The trail led them to the far edge of the uplands, where they stopped to catch their breath. In front of them, the ground sloped away to the 2-leg farmland. Far in the distance, where the sun was beginning to set, loomed the towering shapes of high stones. I wonder if Nightpelt is there yet, Fireheart murmured. In a tunnel below high stones lay the sacred Moonstone, where the leaders of each clan shared dreams with the Star Clan. Well, we don't want to find them down there. Greystripe flicked his tail at the wide expanse of 2-leg land. It'll be hard enough dodging 2-legs, rats, and dogs without meeting the new Shadow Clan leader as well. Fireheart nodded. He thought back to their last journey across this land, with Bluestar and Tigerclaw. They had almost been killed by an attack of rats, and only the arrival of Barley, the loner, had saved them. Even so, Bluestar had lost one of her lives. The memory of it stung Fireheart like a wood ant. Do you think we'll find any trace of Ravenpaw down there? Greystripe meowed, turning his broad face toward Fireheart. I hope so, Fireheart replied solemnly. The last he had seen of Ravenpaw had been the white tip of his tail disappearing into the storm on the uplands. Had the ThunderClan apprentice made it safely to Barley's territory? The 2 warriors started down the slope, carefully sniffing each clump of grass to make sure they stayed on the WindClan trail. It doesn't look as if they were heading for High Stones, Greystripe remarked. The trail took them sideways into a wide grassy field. They skirted the edge, staying near the hedgerow, as WindClan had done. The scent led them out of the field and onto a 2-leg path through a small copse of trees. Look, Greystripe meowed. Sun-bleached piles of prey bones lay scattered in the undergrowth. Mossy bedding had been gathered beneath the thickest patch of brambles. WindClan must have tried to settle here, Fireheart meowed in surprise. I wonder what made them leave, asked Greystripe, sniffing the air. The scent is old. Fireheart shrugged, and the 2 cats followed the trail onward to a thick hedge. With a bit of a struggle, they wriggled through onto a grassy verge. Beyond, a narrow ditch lay, a wide earth track. Greystripe leapt nimbly over the ditch and onto the hard red tack. Fireheart looked around, stiffening as he recognized a hard-edged silhouette in the distance. Greystripe stopped. He hissed. What's up? Fireheart pointed with his nose. Look at the 2-leg place over there. We must be near Barley's territory. Greystripe's ears twitched nervously. That's where those dogs live. But WindClan definitely came this way. We'll have to hurry. We need to get past the 2-leg nest before sunset. Fireheart remembered Barley telling them that the 2-legs let the dogs loose at night, and the sun was already sinking toward the craggy tops of high stones. He nodded. Perhaps the dogs chased WindClan out of the woods. With an anxious twinge, he thought of Ravenpaw. Do you think he found Barley? He asked. Who, Ravenpaw? Why not? We made it this far, meowed Greystripe. Don't underestimate him. Remember the time Tigerclaw sent him to Snake Rocks? He came back with an adder. Fireheart purred at the memory of as Greystripe leapt across the track and through the hedge on the far side. Fireheart chased after him, quickening his pace to match his friend step for step. A dog barked furiously from the 2-leg nest, but its vicious snarling soon faded into the distance. The temperature plunged as the sun set, and frost began to form on the grass. Should we keep going? Asked Graystripe. What if the trail takes us to High Stones after all? Nightpelt will definitely be there by now. Fireheart lifted his nose and sniffed the browning fronds of some ferns. The smell of WindClan, sour with fear, pricked at him. We'd better keep going, he meowed. We'll stop when we have to. A cold breeze carried another odor to Fireheart's nose. There was a thunder path nearby. Graystripe screwed up his face. He'd smelled it too. The warriors exchanged a look of dismay, but pushed on. The stench grew stronger and stronger until they could hear the roar of Thunderpath monsters in the distance. By the time they reached the hedge that ran alongside the wide gray path, it was hard to make out the WindClan trail at all. Graystripe stopped and looked around, uncertainty showing in his eyes, but Fireheart could just make out the fear scent. He crept through the shadows beside the hedge until he reached a place where the hedge was less thick. They sheltered here, Fireheart meowed, imagining the terrified WindClan cats staring through the hedge at the Thunderpath. This was probably the first time most of them had seen the Thunderpath, Graystripe remarked as he joined Fireheart by the hedge. WindClan looked at his friend in surprise. He had never met a WindClan cat. They had been driven out of their territory almost as soon as he had become an apprentice. Didn't they patrol their borders? He asked, puzzled. You've seen their territory. It's pretty wild and barren, and the prey's not easy to catch. I guess they never thought of any other clans bothering hunting there. After all, RiverClan has their river, and in a good year, our forests are filled with prey, so no cat needs their skinny rabbits. A monster roared past on the other side of the hedge, its night eyes glaring. Fireheart and Graystripe flinched as the wind buffeted their fur, even through the wall of leaves. When the noise had faded away, they sat up cautiously and sniffed around the roots of the hedge. The trail seems to lead under here. Fireheart squeezed onto the grass verge that lay along the Thunderpath. Graystripe scrabbled through behind him. But on the other side of the hedge, the scent trail stopped abruptly. They must have either doubled back or crossed the Thunderpath, Fireheart meowed. You look around here, and I'll check out the other side. He fought to keep his voice calm, but exhaustion was making him desperate. Surely they couldn't have lost the trail now, after coming so far. Chapter 5. Fireheart waited until the only sound he could hear was the pounding of blood in his ears. Then he padded to the edge of the Thunderpath. It stretched ahead of him, wide and foul-smelling, but silent. Fireheart darted out. The ground beneath his paws felt cold and smooth. He didn't stop until he reached the grass on the other side. The air here was tainted by the acrid smell of the Thunderpath and its monsters, so Fireheart headed toward the hedge. Still, there was no trace of WindClan cats. His heart sank. Suddenly a monster tore past, making Fireheart leap into the air with terror. He scrambled underneath the hedge and crouched, trembling, frantically wondering what to do next. Then he smelled it, the faintest trace carried on the wind that the monster had stirred up. WindClan had been here. Fireheart called as loudly as he could to Graystripe. There was a pause, then the sound of paws pounding across the Thunderpath to join him. Have you found it? Puffed his friend. Not sure. I got a whiff, but I can't pinpoint it. Fireheart pushed his way through the hedge, Graystripe right behind him. He lifted his nose toward the open field ahead of them. Have you any idea what's over there? No, replied Graystripe. I shouldn't think any clan cat has ever been this far before. Except WindClan, muttered Fireheart darkly. Away from the confusing fumes of the Thunderpath, the trail was suddenly clear. WindClan had definitely come this way. The two cats struck out through the long grass, straight across the field. Fireheart, Graystripe sounded alarmed. What is it? Look. Fireheart stopped and lifted his head. He saw a thunder path ahead of them, arching high into the air on massive stone legs, illuminated by the eyes of the monsters that moved along it. Another thunder path ran below, veering off into the darkness. Graystripe nodded toward a tall thistle. And smell this. Fireheart inhaled the scent. It was fresh WindClan marker. They must have settled somewhere near here, Graystripe murmured in disbelief. A pang of excitement twisted Fireheart's stomach. Both cats looked silently at each other for a moment. Then, without a word, they moved on toward the stinking thunder paths. Graystripe spoke at last. Why would WindClan come to a place like this? I guess not even Broken Star would want to follow them here, Fireheart answered grimly. He stopped. A thought was nagging at him. Graystripe paused beside him. What is it? If WindClan is hiding so near the thunder paths, Fireheart meowed slowly, they must be fairly desperate not to be found. They're more likely to trust us if we arrive in daylight than if we creep up on them in the darkness. Does that mean we can rest? Asked Graystripe, sitting down heavily. Just until it's light, meowed Fireheart. We'll find somewhere to hide and see if we can get some sleep. Are you hungry? Graystripe shook his head. Me neither, Fireheart agreed. I don't know if it's those herbs, or because the stench from the thunder path is making me feel sick. Where shall we sleep? Graystripe looked around. Fireheart had already noticed a dark shadow in the ground up ahead. What's that? A burrow? Graystripe sounded puzzled. It's too big for a rabbit. Surely there can't be a badger set here. Let's take a look, Fireheart suggested. The hole was larger than a badger set, smooth and lined with stone. Fireheart sniffed it, then put his front paws on its rim and peered cautiously inside. A stone tunnel sloped away, down into the ground. I can feel air flowing through it, he meowed, his voice echoing away into the shadows. It must come up somewhere over there. He ducked back out and pointed his nose towards the tangle of thunder paths. Is it empty? Graystripe asked. Smells like it. Come on, then. Graystripe led the way into the tunnel. After a few fox lengths, the slope leveled out. Fireheart halted and sniffed the damp air. He could smell nothing but the fumes of the thunder path. A roaring noise rumbled overhead. Fireheart's paws trembled as the stone floor vibrated. Was the thunder path above them? He fluffed out his coat against the relentless draft and felt Graystripe's fur brush against him. His friend was circling, preparing to settle down to sleep. Fireheart crouched down and huddled beside his friend. He closed his stinging eyes and thought of the gentle forest breezes and the rustling of the leaves. Exhaustion fought briefly with a pang of longing to be at home in his den, before he gave in to the blackness that swam into his mind. When Fireheart opened his eyes again, gray light was glowing at the end of the tunnel. Dawn must be near. Fireheart's bones ached from the cold, hard ground. He nudged Graystripe, who grunted. Morning already? Almost, Fireheart answered, getting to his paws. Graystripe stretched and stood up too. I think we should head that way, Fireheart meowed, craning his neck away from the light. I think this tunnel leads right under a thunder path. It might take us nearer to the... His voice trailed off. He had no words to describe the tangle of thunder paths that they had seen last night. Beside him, Graystripe nodded, and together they began to pad wordlessly into the darkness. Before long, Fireheart spotted light ahead of them. They quickened their pace until they were racing up a short, steep slope that led them into a world filled with gray dawnlight. They had come up near the edge of a patch of barren, dirty grass. Thunder paths enclosed it on two sides, and another arched overhead. A fire burned in the middle of the grass. A few two-legs lay around it. One of them stretched and rolled over, and another grunted angrily in its sleep. But the noise and the stench from the thunder paths didn't seem to wake them. Fireheart watched them warily, then froze as something else caught his eye. Dark outlines that flitted back and forth in front of the flames. Cats. Could it be WindClan? Fireheart looked at the fire and the cats, and his mind flooded with the memory of his dream. The noise of the thunderpath, the sight of the flames, and the cats, and Spotted Leaf's voice murmuring, "Fire will save the clan." A surge of emotion made Fireheart's legs feel weak. Did this mean that ThunderClan's fate was bound up with the fate of WindClan? Fireheart? Fireheart! Greystripe's voice jolted Fireheart back into reality. He breathed deeply to calm himself. "We must find Tallstar and speak with him," he meowed. "Then you think it is WindClan?" asked Greystripe. "You smelled their marker. Who else could it be?" Fireheart replied. Greystripe looked at him, his eyes shining with triumph. "We found them." Fireheart nodded. He didn't point out that finding WindClan was only half their mission. They still had to convince them that it was safe to return home. Greystripe braced himself, ready to leap forward. "Let's go. Hang on," Fireheart warned. "We don't want to startle them." Just then, one of the two legs sat up with a jolt and began shouting at the ragged cats around the fire. The noise roused the other two legs, who joined in with rough, angry voices. The WindClan cats scattered, all caution forgotten. Fireheart and Greystripe raced after them. Fireheart could feel his fur prickle with fear as he and Greystripe ran straight toward the fire and the two legs. Every instinct told him to keep away, but he dared not lose sight of the fleeing WindClan cats. One of the two legs staggered to its feet. Looming up in front of him, Fireheart skidded, sending up a spray of dust. Something exploded beside him, pelting him with hard-edged splinters, but nothing pierced his thick coat. He glanced backwards, checking for Greystripe. He was relieved to see his friend right behind him, his eyes wide with alarm and his fur standing on end. They charged into the safety of the shadows beneath the soaring thunderpath. Ahead, Fireheart watched the WindClan cats stop close to one of the thunderpath's great stone legs, and then, one by one, the cats disappeared into the ground. "Where did they go?" meowed Greystripe in amazement. "Another tunnel," Fireheart suggested. "Come on, let's find out." Cautiously, the two friends approached the spot where the WindClan cats had vanished. As they neared, they saw a hole in the earth, like their resting place on the previous night. The entrance was round and lined with stone, sloping away into utter blackness. Fireheart led the way, all his senses alert for a WindClan patrol. The floor beneath his paws felt wet and slimy, and the sound of trickling water echoed around them. As the tunnel leveled out, Fireheart perked his ears and opened his mouth. The damp air smelled rank and bitter, worse than the tunnel they had slept in. Here, the thunderpath fumes mingled with the fierce scent of WindClan cats. It was too dark to see anything, but after a few paces, Fireheart's whiskers sensed a turning in the tunnel. Fireheart flicked his tail, touching Greystripe lightly with its tip. He couldn't see his friend in the blackness, but Greystripe must have felt the signal, because he stopped beside Fireheart, and together they peered around the corner. Ahead of them, the tunnel was lit by a narrow hole in the ceiling that led to the wasteland above. Fireheart could see many cats huddled together in the gray light, warriors and elders, queens and kits, all pitifully thin. A cold breeze blew relentlessly through the hole in the roof, stirring the thin fur on the skinny bodies. Fireheart shuddered, for the breeze carried to him the stench of sickness and crow food. Suddenly, the tunnel shook as a monster roared overhead. Greystripe and Fireheart, already tense, jumped, but the WindClan cats didn't react. They simply huddled with half-closed eyes, numb to their surroundings. The noise died away. Fireheart took a deep breath and stepped around the corner, out into the thin light. A gray WindClan Tom spun around, his fur standing on end, as he yowled in alarm to the rest of the clan. In one smooth movement, the WindClan warriors formed a line across the tunnel in front of the queens and elders, their backs arched, hissing fiercely. With a feeling of dread, Fireheart saw the glint of unsheathed claws and thorn-sharp fangs. These half-starved cats were about to attack. Chapter 6. Fireheart pressed his body warningly against Graystripe, who had padded out to join him. They had to show no threat if they were to survive. The WindClan warriors stood their ground without moving a muscle. They're waiting for a signal from their leader, Fireheart realized. They still follow the warrior code, even though they have to live like this. From behind the line of warriors, a black and white Tom weaved his way to the front. With a jolt, Fireheart recognized the long-tailed cat from his dream. This must be Tallstar, leader of WindClan. Tallstar sniffed the air, but Fireheart and Graystripe were downwind, their scents carried away by the steady breeze. As the black and white cat walked toward them, Fireheart breathed in the rank odor of crow food that hung on his coat. Like Graystripe, he remained perfectly still, his eyes down, as Tallstar circled them, sniffing their fur closely. Finally, Tallstar returned to his warriors. Fireheart heard him murmur, "ThunderClan." The warriors flattened their fur, but remained in a defensive line, shielding the rest of the cats. Tallstar turned to face his visitors and sat down, curling his tail carefully around his paws. "I was expecting ShadowClan," he growled. His eyes burned with hostility. "Why are you here?" "We came to find you," Fireheart meowed, feeling his voice crack with tension. "Bluestar and the other clan leaders want you to return to your home." The WindClan leader's voice was still wary. "That land is not safe for my clan anymore," he meowed. There was a hunted look in Tallstar's eye that sent a pang of sorrow through Fireheart. "ShadowClan has driven out Brokenstar," he meowed. "He is no longer a threat." The warriors behind Tallstar turned and looked at one another. Murmurs of surprise rippled back through the clan. "You must return as soon as possible," Fireheart urged. "ShadowClan and RiverClan are starting to hunt in the uplands. We saw a RiverClan hunting patrol near the old Badger set while we were on our way here." Tallstar bristled angrily. "But they are poor rabbit hunters," Graystripe added. "I think they went home with empty bellies." Tallstar and his warriors purred with satisfaction. Their good spirits encouraged Fireheart, but he could see how weak they were. This clan would find the journey back to the uplands long and hard. "May we travel with you?" he suggested respectfully. Tallstar's eyes flashed. He knew the question was a tactful offer of help. He looked steadily at Fireheart. "Yes," he replied at last. "Thank you." Fireheart realized he hadn't introduced himself. "This is Graystripe," he meowed, dipping his head. "And I am Fireheart. We are warriors of ThunderClan." "Fireheart," repeated Tallstar thoughtfully. Sunlight was flooding through the gap in the roof now, making Fireheart's orange pelt glow in the dim tunnel. "The name suits you." Another monster roared overhead, and Fireheart and Graystripe flinched. Tallstar watched them with amusement and flicked his tail. It must have been the signal for the line of warriors behind him to split up. "We shall leave at once," he announced, standing up. "Are we all fit for the journey?" Tallstar asked, as the warriors began to move among the queens and elders. "All except Morning Flower's Kit," replied a mottled brown warrior. "He's too young." "Then we must take turns carrying him," answered Tallstar. The WindClan cats shuffled forward, their eyes dull with pain and exhaustion. A tortoiseshell queen was holding a tiny kit gently by the scruff of its neck. The little creature's eyes were hardly open. "Ready?" called Tallstar. A black Tom with a misshapen paw looked around the clan and answered for them. "Ready," he meowed. Fireheart and Graystripe turned and made their way back to the tunnel entrance and waited while the WindClan cats emerged blinking into the daylight. Some of the elders blinked so long, their faces screwed up against the weak sun, that Fireheart guessed they had not been outside the tunnel for some time. Tallstar padded out of the tunnel last and walked to the head of his clan. "Shall we take you back the way we came?" Fireheart asked him. "I believe it's a shortcut." "Is it safe?" asked Tallstar. Fireheart saw the haunted look once more in the leader's eyes. "We meant no trouble coming here," Graystripe meowed. Tallstar flicked his tail decisively, as though he were brushing away any doubt. "Good," he declared. "You come with me, Graystripe. Show me the way. Fireheart, travel beside the clan. Tell my deputy if you see trouble." "Which one is he?" asked Fireheart. Tallstar nodded toward the black Tom. "Deadfoot," he meowed. The warrior turned at the sound of his name and pricked his ears. Fireheart dipped his head in greeting. He left Graystripe with Tallstar and joined the other cat. As the clan made their way up under the Thunderpath arch, Fireheart could still smell the fire, but when they padded out onto the patch of wasteland, the two legs were nowhere to be seen. Graystripe headed straight for the tunnel where he and Fireheart had spent the night. Tallstar entered first, while Fireheart waited at the back until all the clan had disappeared inside. Only Deadfoot remained. "Are you sure it leads to daylight?" the Black Tom meowed warily. "It just leads under the Thunderpath." "Have you never used this tunnel?" Fireheart asked, surprised. "When our warriors cross the Thunderpath, they prefer to see where we're headed," growled Deadfoot. Fireheart nodded, and the deputy added, "You go first." Fireheart padded down into the dark hole. He emerged to find the Wind Clan cats staring across the field that led to the final Thunderpath. Fireheart saw Tallstar consult briefly with Graystripe before they set off into the long, frost-crisp grass. Fireheart walked with the rest of the clan, flanking one side, while Deadfoot limped steadily on the other. Before they were halfway across the field, it was clear that many of the cats were having trouble keeping up the pace. "Tallstar," yelled Deadfoot, "we need to travel more slowly." Fireheart looked over his shoulder and saw some of the cats falling farther and farther behind. Morning Flower was among them, the kit swinging from her mouth. Fireheart bounded over to her. She was panting heavily. It couldn't have been long since her kitting. "Let me carry him," Fireheart offered, "just until you have caught your breath." Morning Flower glanced warily at Fireheart, but her eyes softened when they met his. She put her kit down, and Fireheart took it gently and walked next to her so that she didn't lose sight of her precious bundle. Tallstar slowed the pace, but only a little, in spite of his obvious exhaustion and the fact that every rib showed under his fur. He burned with a fierce energy that lent swiftness to his paws. Fireheart could understand part of the reason for his urgency. The sun was steadily climbing above the horizon. Some of the Wind Clan cats were sick, some old, and all of them were weak from hunger. If they were going to cross the Thunderpath without losing any cats, they would have to do it quickly before the monsters came in their swarms. By the time Fireheart and Morning Flower arrived at the hedge, Wind Clan had gathered around its leader. "We cross the Thunderpath here," Tallstar announced, above the noise of a monster racing past. The Wind Clan leader squeezed under the hedge. Deadfoot, Graystripe, and a younger warrior followed him. Morning Flower leaned toward Fireheart and took hold of her kit. She had stopped panting now, and as she took the kit from Fireheart, she brushed her cheek gratefully against his. He dipped his head to the tortoiseshell queen and followed Graystripe under the hedge. Tallstar and Deadfoot sat staring wordlessly at the wide gray path. Graystripe stood beside them. He flicked his tail toward the younger warrior. "This is One Whisker," he told Fireheart. A monster sped past, almost drowning out Graystripe's words and whipping up stinging dust. Through streaming eyes, Fireheart muted greeting to One Whisker and turned his attention to the Thunderpath. "We should try to get the clan over in small groups," he meowed. "Graystripe and I will stay with any that need help." He looked at the clan leader. "If you agree, Tallstar," he added. Tallstar nodded. "The strongest group will go first," he meowed. The other Wind Clan cats began to appear through the hedge. Before long, the whole clan was clustered beside them, pressed against the sharp twigs, as far back from the Thunderpath as possible. Fireheart and Graystripe moved to the edge, watching for a break in the line of monsters. The Thunderpath was much busier than it had been when they'd crossed last night. One Whisker led the first group forward. "Do you want us to cross with you?" Fireheart offered. He could smell the young Tom's fear. The mottled brown tabby shook his head. The cats beside him peered along the Thunderpath, first one way, then the other. All was quiet, and the group dashed safely over to the other side. Two warriors came next, accompanied by a pair of skinny elders. "Now," Fireheart ordered as a monster flashed safely past. The four Wind Clan cats stepped out onto the empty Thunderpath. The elders winced as they padded across on paws raw from the damp tunnel. Fireheart willed them on breathlessly as they neared the other side. A monster was zooming towards them. "Look out!" Graystripe yelled, Even the two elders bounded forward for a bristling and hurtled themselves onto the other side, a heartbeat before the monster raced past. Two larger groups crossed, leaving just one more. Only once they were safely over would Tallstar and Deadfoot cross. Morningflower and her kit stepped up to Fireheart's side. Behind her trembled three very elderly cats. "We'll cross with you," Fireheart meowed. He looked at Graystripe, who nodded. "Tell us when it's safe to go, Graystripe." Fireheart leaned forward to take Morningflower's kit, but she pulled back, her ears flat. Fireheart looked deep into her frightened ambered eyes and understood. She and her kit would live or die together. Now, at Graystripe's yell, Fireheart and Morningflower stepped out onto the thunderpath. The elders crept out behind them, with Graystripe beside them. Time seemed to stand still as the elders hobbled slowly forward on stiff, battle-scarred legs. If a monster came now, we're all fresh kill, Fireheart thought. The other side was still several rabbit leaps away. "Come on," urged Graystripe. The elders tried to hurry, but one stumbled, and Graystripe had to nose him back onto his paws. Fireheart heard the distant roar of a monster. "Go on ahead," he hissed to Morningflower. "We'll bring the others." Morningflower stumbled forward. Her kit squealed as it bumped against the hard ground. Fireheart and Graystripe pressed themselves against the elders' scrawny bodies, nudging them forward. The noise of the approaching monster grew louder and louder. Fireheart grabbed the nearest elder by the scruff of the neck and dragged him forward, before turning to haul the second closer to the verge. The monster raced closer. Fireheart closed his eyes and braced himself. There was a screech and an acrid smell that stung his throat, then a fading roar as the monster sped past. Fireheart opened his eyes and looked around. Graystripe was crouching in the middle of the thunderpath, unscathed but staring with eyes as wide as full moons. One elder cowered between them. The other two trembled near the verge. The monster was hurtling away from them, swerving across the thunderpath. Thanks, StarClan, it had missed them all. Fireheart took a shuddering breath. "Come on," he meowed to the last elder. "Almost there." Tallstar bounded across with Deadfoot and gathered his trembling clan around him on the verge. One whisker touched Fireheart's nose with his own. "You would have died for us," he murmured. "WindClan will never forget that." Tallstar's voice sounded behind them. "One Whisker is right. We shall honor you both in our stories. We must keep going," he continued. "We have a long journey ahead of us." As the cats prepared to move off, Fireheart patted over to Morningflower. She was busy licking her kit. "Is he all right?" Fireheart asked. "Oh, yes," answered Morningflower. "What about you?" asked Fireheart. Morningflower didn't answer. Fireheart turned to a gray queen who answered his unspoken question. "Don't worry," she meowed. "I'll take the kit next." The clan followed the hedgerow along the thunderpath before turning away to join the track along through the woods. The scents here seemed to soothe the WindClan cats, but the journey had taken its toll. They were traveling slower than ever, and when they reached the fence at the far side, it took all of Fireheart's strength to help the weakest cats over. The sun had passed its highest point by the time Fireheart spotted the two-leg place in the distance. He sniffed the air hopefully, but there was still no scent of Ravenpaw. Fireheart felt a stab of grief and tried to ignore the nagging thought that he should never have sent his friend here alone. Clouds billowed up over high stones, growing blacker as they covered the sinking sun. The cold wind ruffled the cat's fur, bringing the first drops of rain. Fireheart looked at the WindClan cats. There was no way they could travel through a long, wet night. He was tired too, and for the first time since he'd eaten Yellowfang's herbs, he was feeling the effects of hunger. A glance at Graystripe told him that his friend felt the same way. The big gray warrior's tail drooped, and his ears were flattened against the spattering rain. "Tallstar," Fireheart called. "Perhaps we should stop soon and shelter for the night." The WindClan leader stopped and waited while Fireheart caught up with him. "I agree," he meowed. "There's a ditch here. We can shelter in that until sunrise." Graystripe and Fireheart exchanged glances. "We might be better sheltering a hedgerow," Fireheart suggested. "There are rats in these ditches." Tallstar nodded. Very well. He turned to his clan and announced that they would be spending the night here. The queens and elders flopped down at once, despite the rain, while the warriors and apprentices gathered to discuss hunting patrols. Fireheart and Greystripe joined them. I don't know how good the hunting will be here, Fireheart meowed. There are too many two legs. Greystripe's stomach growled as if in agreement. The other warriors turned to him with amusement but sympathetic eyes. Then they froze as the grass behind them rustled. The WindClan warriors bristled and arched their backs, unsheathing their sharp claws, but Fireheart and Greystripe turned their heads joyfully. The wind carried a scent as familiar as their own den. Ravenpaw! Fireheart gasped as a sleek black cat emerged from the long grass. Fireheart raced over to his old friend and nuzzled him. Thanks, StarClan, you're safe, he purred. He stepped back and studied Ravenpaw in surprise. What had happened to the skinny, scared black apprentice? This cat was plump and sleek, and his fur, usually so dull before, now shed the rain like a holly leaf. Firepaw! Ravenpaw meowed in delight. Fireheart, Greystripe corrected him. He stepped forward and touched noses with the black cat. We're warriors now. I'm Greystripe. Do you know this cat? Snarled Deadfoot. The hostility in his voice made Fireheart flinch. He looked at the bristling WindClan cats and silently cursed himself for calling Ravenpaw's name out loud. He just hoped Tallstar's warriors had been too distracted to hear it. If WindClan mentioned it at a gathering, it would spread through the clans like a forest fire. Ravenpaw was supposed to be dead. Is he a loner? Asked one Whisker. He can help us find food, Fireheart meowed quickly, glancing at Ravenpaw. The black cat nodded. I know all the best places to hunt around here, he meowed. His fur didn't even bristle beneath so many hostile gazes. How much has he changed? Fireheart thought. Why would a loner help us? Demanded Deadfoot. Loners have helped us before, Greystripe told him. Another loner once saved us from a rat attack near here. Ravenpaw stepped forward and bent his head respectfully as he addressed the WindClan warriors. Let me help you. I owe my life to Fireheart and Greystripe, and if they've traveled with you, then you must be friends. He lifted his eyes and let his gaze rest on the WindClan cats. They returned his stare, more wary now than hostile. The rain was falling harder, and with their fur bedraggled, they looked skinnier than ever. I'll go find Barley, Ravenpaw meowed. He will help too. He turned and disappeared through the long grass. Tallstar's eyes burned with curiosity, but all he asked Fireheart was, Can we trust him? Fireheart met Tallstar's gaze completely. Tallstar nodded to his warriors. They let the fur lie flat on their shoulders and settled down to wait. Fireheart was almost wet through to his skin when Ravenpaw appeared again. This time Barley was with him. Fireheart greeted the black and white loner with a friendly mew, and it was good to see him again. Barley took one look at the dripping cats and meowed, We need to find you some proper shelter. Follow me. Fireheart leapt forward at once, glad to move his stiffening legs. Greystripe was right behind him, but the WindClan cats hung back, fear and suspicion showing in their eyes. Tallstar blinked at his clan. We have to trust him, he growled before returning to follow the loner. One by one, the WindClan cats fell in step behind their leader. Barley and Ravenpaw led them through the hedge into another field. In an overgrown corner among the brambles and nettles stood an abandoned two-legged nest. The walls were full of holes where stones had fallen out, and only half of the roof was left. The WindClan cats stared fearfully at it. You won't get me in there, muttered one of the elders. Two legs never come here. Now, Barley reassured them. It'll give us some shelter from the rain, urged Fireheart. One of the apprentices whispered loudly. I'm not surprised he wants to hide in a two-legged nest. Once a kitty pet, always a kitty pet. Fireheart bristled. He hadn't heard that insult for several moons. But the story that a kitty pet had joined a clan must have made rich gossip at any gathering. Of course WindClan would know. He whipped around and glared at the apprentice. You've spent 2 moons living in a two-legged tunnel. Does that make you a rat? The WindClan apprentice drew himself up, ruffling out his fur, but Greystripe stepped between them. Come on. We're just getting wetter the longer we stand here. Tallstar meowed. We've faced worse than a two-leg shelter these past moons. One night here will do us no harm." The Wind Clan cats murmured nervously amongst themselves. Clearly reluctant, but with a glance at Fireheart, Morningflower picked up her kit and padded into the two-leg shelter. The Grey Queen followed after her, nudging her own kit forward out of the rain. The other cats gradually followed until every cat was inside. Fireheart looked around the gloomy shelter. The ground was bare except for patches where weeds had burrowed their way under the stone walls. The wind and rain found their way through the gaps in the walls and roof, but it was drier and more sheltered than anywhere outside. He watched the Wind Clan cats sniffing cautiously around. As they began to settle themselves away from the dripping holes and drafty cracks, he glanced at Greystripe, relieved. Only Tallstar and Deadfoot remained on their paws. "What about food?" asked Deadfoot. Barley spoke. You should all be resting," he meowed. Fireheart interrupted him before Barley could finish saying Ravenpaw's name out loud. "Why don't you two show me and Greystripe the best places to hunt around here? Deadfoot and One Whisker will go with you," meowed Tallstar. Fireheart couldn't decide if the Wind Clan leader still didn't trust these two strangers, or if he was determined to show that his clan could look after itself. The 6 cats ventured back out into the rain. Hunting would be hard, but Fireheart was starving. Hunger always made him a better hunter. Tonight the voles and mice wouldn't stand a chance. "Just show me where they are," he meowed to Barley and Ravenpaw. The 2 cats led them into a patch of woodland. Fireheart breathed in a lungful of the familiar scent. Then he dropped into a hunting crouch and began to stalk into the ferns. When the hunting party returned, each cat carried a mouthful of fresh kill. The Wind Clan cats shared a feast with their new allies that night. Every cat, from the eldest to the youngest, ate their fill, then curled up together to share tongues in mutual grooming, while outside the wind and rain lashed at the walls of the shelter. As darkness settled in, Barley got to his paws. "I'm off. Rats to catch," he meowed. Fireheart stood and touched the loner's nose with his own. "Thank you again," he purred. "This is the second time you've helped us." "Thanks for sending Ravenpaw to me," replied Barley. "He's turning into a fine ratter, and it's good to share a meal with a fellow cat from time to time." "Is he happy here?" asked Fireheart. "Ask him yourself," meowed Barley, and with that he turned and disappeared into the night. Fireheart padded over to Tallstar, who was washing his paws. Fireheart couldn't help noticing his swollen and painful they look. "We'll take it in turns to keep watch tonight, if you would like," he offered, flicking his head towards Greystripe and Ravenpaw. Tallstar looked up at him gratefully, exhaustion clouding his eyes. "Thank you," he meowed. Fireheart blinked respectfully at the Wind Clan leader and went to tell Ravenpaw and Greystripe. His offer to Tallstar had been genuine, but it also meant he could be alone with his 2 friends. He was desperate to get Ravenpaw out of earshot of the Wind Clan cats and ask him what he had been up to. Greystripe and Ravenpaw bounded over to his side as soon as he called them. Fireheart led them to a corner of the 2-legged nest, close enough to the entrance for them to keep watch, but far enough away from the other cats that they could talk in private. "So, what happened after we left you?" he asked Ravenpaw, as soon as the 3 friends had settled down. "I headed straight across the Wind Clan territory like you suggested." "What about the 2-legged dogs?" Greystripe put in. "Were they loose?" "Yes, but it was easy to avoid them," Ravenpaw told him. Fireheart was surprised by how casually his friend dismissed the dogs. "Easy," he echoed. "I could smell them from a long way off. I just waited until dawn, and once the dogs were tied up again, I tracked down Barley. He's been great. I think he likes having me around." Ravenpaw's expression suddenly clouded, which is more than Tigerclaw ever did, he meowed bitterly. "What did you tell him?" Fireheart recognized the hunted look in Ravenpaw's eyes as he spoke about his old mentor. "We said you'd been killed by a Shadow Clan patrol," he answered quietly. 2 Wind Clan apprentices were wandering toward them. Fireheart twitched his ears to warn his friends they had an audience. "Oh yes," meowed Ravenpaw, raising his voice. "We loners eat clan apprentices whenever we can catch one." The Wind Clan apprentices shot him a scornful look. "You don't scare us," they mewed. Really? Purred Ravenpaw. Well, I guess your meat would be tough and stringy anyway. How come you're such good friends with a loner? One of the apprentice asked Fireheart. A wise warrior makes friends wherever he can, Fireheart replied. If it weren't for this loner, we'd still be cold and hungry instead of dry and well fed. He narrowed his eyes in warning, and the apprentices slunk away. So, ThunderClan thinks I'm dead, meowed Ravenpaw when they had gone. He gazed down at his paws. Well, it's probably for the best. He lifted his eyes and looked at Fireheart and Graystripe. I'm glad I've seen you again, he meowed warmly. Fireheart purred, and Graystripe prodded his friend affectionately with a hind paw. But you look tired, Ravenpaw continued. You should get some sleep. I'll keep watch tonight. I can rest tomorrow. He stood up and gently licked each of his old friends on the head. Then he padded to the entrance of the shelter, sat down, and stared out into the rain. Fireheart looked at Graystripe. Are you tired? Exhausted, admitted Graystripe. The Grey Warrior rested his head on his paws and closed his eyes. Fireheart took a final look at Ravenpaw, sitting alone in the entrance. He knew now that he had made the right decision in helping Ravenpaw to leave. ThunderClan. Perhaps Bluestar had been right when she'd said Ravenpaw would be better off without the clan. Each cat has his own destiny, he thought. Ravenpaw was happy, and that was all that mattered. When Fireheart woke, Ravenpaw was gone. It was past dawn. The gray rain clouds had begun to drift away. Tinged by the rosy glow of the rising sun, they looked like blossoms floating across the pond. Fireheart stared through a gap in the roof and watched them as the WindClan cats stirred and helped themselves to the leftovers of last night's catch. A short-tailed brown tom joined Fireheart and gazed up at the clouds with him. Fireheart jumped as a curious yowl suddenly escaped the brown tom's throat. The noise brought other WindClan cats crowding around them, murmuring and anxious. What is it, Barkface? Prompted Morningflower. Has StarClan spoken to you? Fireheart realized that this Tom must be WindClan's medicine cat. He tensed instinctively at the sight of Barkface's bristling fur. The clouds are stained with blood, rasped Barkface, his eyes wide and glazed. It is a sign from our ancestors. There is trouble ahead. This day shall bring an unnecessary death. And that's where we will stop for the night. I hope everyone enjoyed listening, and I hope everyone has a good evening and a good night. So, till next time, my friends, take care.